The Whaley house. Wow. Is that yours? This is it. Cool. This looks neat. The light. The lights are dimming.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Whaley house. Now, this house was built in 1857, but the room that you all are in was built in 1856, both by the man named Thomas Whaley. Now, originally, this room was supposed to be a rat-proof granary, but he built it on the ground, so that means that there was no foundation, so that allowed rats to come in and eat all his profits away. So after that, he had to turn this room into quite a few things. It became a toy store, Sunday school, billiard hall, polling place, even a meeting hall, and the meeting hall still gets used today for Old Town and its communities. But most notably, this room became San Diego's second courtroom, which is what we all see before us. Now, I'm sure some of you know that we are still inhabited or haunted, so I'm going to give you right here for the paranormal. Alright, we're going to try to do it next. Now, I can't guarantee that anything will happen, but be open to it. If you see, hear, or feel anything unusual, take out your phone or camera, whichever it is, and take a quick photo or video, because the ghosts tend not to be camera shy. Now, speaking of the ghosts, there's nothing evil or malicious within this house either, so nothing is here to harm you or cause anything like that. So to put it simply, this is their home and we are their guests. Now some of us might be familiar with court proceedings, so all rise and then next set of store right behind you.
Oh, this thing is. Seen some. Oh, this looks neat. See something. Oh, this looks pretty neat.
All right, so welcome to Mr. Whaley's General Store. This is actually one of his many business ventures. And he came from a business family that settled down in New York, but he wanted to make a name for himself. So he left New York, sailed across the Cape Horn, and then got to San Francisco, which took him about 204 days to do that journey because we did not have the Panama Canal at that time. And when he got to San Francisco, he decided he was going to sell mining equipment to the gold rush miners. And he did so for a little bit until an arson fire took that business. And then he decided he was going to move down to San Diego. And when he got to San Diego, he got together with the local business leaders, and he learned Spanish so he could sell to the community. So he sold fabric to the women, tobacco to the men, and liquor to the judge. Right? It is a bit odd being able to sell liquor on legal grounds, but it is actually the judge himself that gave Thomas permission to do so. And that's because he was a little friendly with spirits, if you guys my drift. Now we do have the copy of the liquor license right over there on the wall. It was about $15 a month for Thomas. And then when the courtroom deal ended abruptly, they were not going to pay him for the last month of it. And so he was a little upset and held on to all the legal records and stored them upstairs. And then one night when he went out on business, a posse formed up in Newtown, which is what we know as downtown today. And they came over and broke into the house in the middle of the night. But the wife and children were still here. And then they held his wife at gunpoint at the staircase and then demanded that she give them back the legal records. And she did, but Thomas was infuriated by these events. And so he demanded that the county pretty much pay for the damages and the rent. But they just simply ignored him and they did not pay him a single penny. So kind of unfortunate. Now, Thomas being the businessman he was, he named 2 out of 3 of his sons after business partners. His oldest son is Francis Hinton Whaley, right over here. And in many rights, he was more successful than his own father. He became a justice of peace. And ironically, he was our very first Whaley House Museum tour guide. He opened up his own little Whaley House Museum right over in the courtroom area in the early 1900s. Now, Thomas Whaley Jr., he died at 1.5 years, but we'll get a little bit more into his story when we go upstairs. The third gentleman is George Whaley. He was kind of the black sheep of the family, and the reason for that was because he loved music and he pursued that as his career. But Mr. Whaley did not agree with this. And so this led to many arguments between him and George, and then after a very bad one, George dropped the Whaley name and went by his mother's maiden name, Delaney, and then he spent his nights in brothels and drank all of his money away. So quite the profound life, right? Now, this frustration carried on with Thomas all the way until his dying day in 1890, where it is said that he died in a fit of rage, which is known to be a heart attack. And that was described by his youngest daughter, Lily. Now, some of us staff and guests alike, we still claim to feel Mr. Whaley's controlling nature and presence. Sometimes it feels like he's standing behind us and watching us at all times. Other times you get that faint whiff of cigar smoke, and that kind of lets you know that he's around. And sometimes you might even hear him pacing the upper floors. Don't know what that was. But,
That's one of my,
the coming out, got
sorry.
No worries. Now, one little fun fact about Thomas Whaley, even though there's a portrait of him right over there, he was considered the handsomest old man in San Diego at the time. So quite the title, right?
You're the handsomest old person I know.
Right. Now, who's brave enough to open up that door for me right over there?
Not it.
Oh, wait. No, just kidding. Alright, we're all gonna be headed inside. Let me kiss first.
Exactly.
Sure. Oh,
I love that. It's my favorite lamp.
Wow. I just. Is there a dog? I saw a dog under the table. Oh,
Get up there.
So, welcome to the Whaley family dining room. Now, it is said that in Victorian era households that the men were the head of the house, but really it was the women during that time. They cooked, they cleaned, they took care of their children, and they did everything necessary to hold the families together.
Still
While the husbands were out on business.
Sorry.
Now, you saw the 3 photos of the boys in the other room. There's also 3 photos of their daughters. We have Anna Amelia right over there, kind of giving you the dead stare. And then right next to her, we got Violet Eloise Whaley. And then on this wall right over here, on the far right, we have Corinne Lillian Whaley. Now, there are a couple photos of Mrs. Whaley herself. There was an artistic illustration of her in that little mini hallway, if you guys did not see it. And then on the far right, there's a picture of her in her younger years. And in this group photo, she's in between everybody within her elderly years. Now, 6 children total, plenty of grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and one of her great-grandchildren was actually Marion Reynolds. And her and her family, they didn't live too far. They lived in Oceanside, and they would visit very often, but when they would visit, they would have to stay for a little while because their means of transportation was not that great. And her story is that she was playing in an open lot with some of her siblings, and she stumbled across a bottle that had a rattle cap on it. And the rattle cap was used to signify that there was dangerous contents within whatever it was that you were holding. But for her, it just kind of seemed like a toy. And so she plays with it, and the cap comes off, and there's honey inside. And so she has a little taste. Unfortunately, that was none other than Kellogg's ant paste, which is this thing right here on the wall. And it's practically honey laced with arsenic. So she died of arsenic poisoning just 10 days shy of her 3rd birthday. It's kind of sad and tragic. Now, the thing about child spirits, though, is that they don't hang on to the misfortunes and the tragedies that usually fall upon them. Really, they hang on to the security, the safety, and the good times that they felt. So a lot of people claim that she's within this household and sometimes even in this dining room. So ladies, if you feel a little tug on your shirt or maybe a little hand reach up to grab yours, don't be scared. It's just her letting you know that she feels safe with you. Now, we are going to be making our way upstairs into the theater room. There are a couple of things that I have to point out before we make our way up there. There are a few things that are small in this house. If you haven't already noticed, the dining set's kind of low. The door frame right over there is pretty small as well, and the railing for the staircase is very low as well. The stairs are steep and they're carpeted, so watch your step as you make your way up. Don't need any of those doors. So, now, on your left is going to be the nursery, and on the right is the master bedroom. Feel free to have a look at those, and when you guys are done, have a seat beside the room, okay?
Yeah.
Oh, this is neat. Wow. I feel something. It's almost like cobwebs.
Oh my goodness.
It's the nursery.
Thomas Whaley Jr. died 17 months ago.
Oh, jeez. He died young. They died young.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of bad things happen. So sad.
Looks neat. That's where the hanging was. I feel something. I think that's where the hanging was.
Really?
Yeah. One of the steps. This is outside. I feel something. Hey, how's it going? A Whaley house. Wow. I feel something. Something about the stairs. Is that supposedly where the hanging was?
No, the archway.
The archway.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
The stairs, that's where Mrs. Whaley was held at gunpoint.
Yes.
And so that would kind of like, a lot of people think that the traumatic events and whatnot from the residual energy of that probably still lingers around there.
All right.
Some people have gotten like slightly pushed or like slightly nudged on the staircase and stuff like that. And others have even seen Mr. Whaley peering over the staircase and kind of like looking at it.
I feel something. The energy.
Yeah. They're probably at least
It's
trying
cool.
to make some kind of connection with you or saying hi.
It's cool. I'm into this. I'm into this. Wow. We capture a lot. Oh boy, I didn't see this.
You're supposed to see something. I can't see it. She showed me it's supposed to come from the wall, but I can't see it. She said, but look at the mirror.
Look at the mirror.
Something's supposed to happen. I just don't see it. I just see the light moving.
I see something moving.
Yeah, I see the light moving, like that.
Okay. I see the light moving.
So a lot of people end up joining the night guided tour groups and whatnot. They think that we're going to do jump scares, and then we have people right over there behind the curtains and whatnot. But
Oh
we do it
boy.
like that. So, welcome to San Diego's first commercial theater. This whole second floor was rented out to a man named Thomas Tanner and his theatrical group called the Tanner Troupe. And on opening night, they had 150 people in attendance in this very room. Yeah, kind of crazy to think about. I guess they were all crammed up in here. They were kind of on the balcony and slightly trickled into the hallway. The only reason why they were on the balcony was because there used to be a staircase that connected to it at the time, but they got rid of it after the theater was gone. Now Tanner and his group, they're known to be a little bit flirty and lecherous. So ladies, you might feel like someone's playing with your hair, maybe grab your shoulder, or even put a hand around your waist. Gentlemen, you might get that warm breath against your ear, maybe just scratch behind your neck, or a hand kind of going down the middle of your back. If so, you might think these spirits are finding you alluring and whatnot, but they're just acting and playing games, so don't feed into it too much, okay? Now, unfortunately for this theater, the curtain fell a bit too soon. It was 3 weeks after opening night when Thomas Tanner died due to illness and disease. This man is now buried at the cemetery straight down the road. Unfortunately, though, he's not the only spirit that can be felt here on the second floor.
Wow.
Thomas Whaley Jr., that little boy that I mentioned downstairs, he died at 1.5 years due to scarlet fever. There was a nasty pandemic of it at the time. If you caught it when you were young, you more than likely were not going to make it. It's the unfortunate case for him. So, Thomas lost his namesake, Frances lost his baby brother, Anna lost a piece of her heart.
Oh man.
Some people can still feel that residual pain, that anxiety and uneasiness when they're standing next to the nursery room. So we ended up putting Mrs. Whaley's original rocking chair back in there to kind of help keep it in that place. Now, unfortunately, though, for the Whaleys, that was just the beginning. You guys saw Violet downstairs. She was a good, bright-natured girl. She was a musician, a poet, a writer, amongst many other things. So any upstanding man at that time would have been quite lucky to marry her. At the age of 19, she got married to a man named George Bertolacci. And then the day before Valentine's Day, she got a letter from him. And in that letter, he confesses to a whole slew of lies. He had a drinking problem, an illegitimate daughter. He lost his money to a woman in a nearby town when he was courting Violet. And he said that his family was dead, but really that they were alive and looking for him the whole time. Hence the whole reason for the letter. And so in this letter, he said, Violet, I still love you. Give me 2, 3, 4 years to redeem myself. I'll be the man of your dreams, and I will support you all the way. Now, she doesn't really believe him because the guy just lied to her about everything, so she comes back home. And when she gets back home, her parents force her to get a divorce. Unfortunately for young women at that time, if you were in a divorce, you were kind of looked down upon, and she quickly became the talk of town. So she tried to leave San Diego, but her parents also forced her to stay. So at that point, she felt trapped and that she didn't really have any control over her life. And then after some time, she made an attempt to try to drown herself in the Canadian system. But her father showed up just in time and pulled her out, and then brought her to the doctors. And that's when he learned that she suffers from bouts of melancholy, which is depression. And back then, they didn't really handle it all too well. They kind of just thought it was something you felt and you would get over it. But since she made the attempt on her life, they advised Mr. Whaley to keep her in the master bedroom, where the mother and the sisters could keep an eye on her. She was there for about a month. And then she wrote a letter to the family early in the morning saying that the doctors could no longer do anything for her anymore, and that she was cursed and accursed. And she gets her father's revolver, goes out to the outhouse and locks the door behind her, and she shoots herself in the chest. Now, unfortunately, she did not die immediately, and Mr. Whaley, who heard the crack of the gun, he runs outside, realizes that the door is locked, and so he breaks it down. And when he picks up Violet, well, you're just going to have to figure that one out when you follow me downstairs to the parlor, okay? So, take your time and whatnot. When you guys are ready, follow me downstairs.
Wow. I felt something at the nursery. I felt sad, yeah.
That is sad. Oh, it came from that way? I'm a little confused as to where we're at.
I took a picture in 2013 on one of the beds. It looked like it was a person laying on the bed.
Really?
Yeah. I lost that picture.
You mean you got the person?
It was a person on there. Okay. Ready? I feel something. Oh. Pictures.
All right, so as I was saying upstairs, Thomas Whaley, he picks up his daughter and then he brings her into this room and sets her on the couch right by the window. He inspects the wound to her chest and realizes that it was fatal and he did not have time to wait on a doctor, so he spent the last few minutes that Violet had with her. And it said that she did not say a word and she didn't even cry out in pain. She just laid there quietly until she passed away. And so unfortunately for the Whaleys, they had lost another child that day. Now I'm sure with all the family tragedies and whatnot, it's kind of enough to explain the paranormal activity within this house, right? Well, before the house was even built, these were the execution grounds for San Diego. And Mr. Whaley, he witnessed the last execution on the property. And that was the hanging of Yankee Jim Robinson. Now Yankee Jim, he was an Australian man that moved over to California, and he lived up north in the 1840s, but he was wanted for being a common horse thief, so he fled down to San Diego. But when he got here, he had one problem. He kept stealing. So he stole a little rowboat and he tried to steal a pilot boat, but the captain was on the pilot boat, and so he was unsuccessful. And then when he got ashore, he was arrested and tried for grand larceny, and then he was sentenced to hang. Now the reason why this was so infamous is because, well, they kind of botched it. They messed it up. Yankee Jim, he was a lot taller than the average person back then. He was about 6'4", and they mismeasured his noose. And so when he came off the back of the wagon, he didn't get the immediate snap of the neck. Instead, his feet touched the ground and he bounced, and he strangled for about 20 to 30 minutes in front of everybody. And Mr. Whaley watched this. And then he bought the property for cheap, built the house on it, and then constructed this archway at the exact spot where the gallows stood and where Yankee Jim was hung at.
Oh, this is it.
I was wondering what was going on.
Now, he is considered the most terrifying paranormal activity when it comes to the house, but he's not evil, but he will definitely let you know if he does not like you. And that primarily goes for men. So you might get this choking feeling, maybe scratches on your neck, warm ring around it, maybe even rope marks. Now, I've kind of gotten the warm ring and scratch marks before, so it kind of feels like that this guy doesn't like me, but it is what it is. I have to tell a story every day. Now, like I said, most terrifying, but he's not the strongest. The strongest is actually that of Mrs. Whaley. Now, a lot of psychics and mediums, they recognize her to be the heart of the home. And during her time, she was considered the life of the party. When Mr. Whaley would go out on his business trips, she would throw parlor parties and entertain her guests by playing on her pump organ, which is actually right there, and that thing's older than the house itself. Now, life of the party, but maybe her presence now may be a little bit too much for some to handle. You might get this feeling that starts in your stomach, which kind of rises to your throat, and you almost feel like you can't breathe for a second. Other times, people have heard music or singing emanating from where the pump organ is at. But her biggest characteristic is that of her lavender perfume. And if you smell that, you might get this pressure in your chest, maybe your head, or even a slight feeling of lightheadedness. Now, if you feel that, that might be her letting you know that she's a little interested in your acquaintance. And speaking of acquaintances, how many of us have at least seen or heard of the show Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Alright. Right? So, the original host for that show is Regis Philbin. Back in the 1960s, he and a couple buddies have heard of the haunted reputation of this house, and then they decided that they were going to spend the night. And then they were in this room, and they had their backs facing that window, and then Mrs. Whaley came out of this doorway, and she was wearing a black dress, and it was said that she was going to say hi. But before that she could, the guys were already running out of the house, screaming, terrified, and promised that they were never going to come back here again. And they kept that promise for like 50 years, but Regis came back in 2014. Unfortunately, though, he is no longer with us anymore, but we at the Whaley house believe that he and Mrs. Whaley are getting a little bit more acquainted on the other side. Now we are going to be finishing up the last bit of this tour at the back of the property. I'm going to let you guys take your photos and videos and whatnot, but when you guys are done, find me by the open door at the back, and then I'll direct you the rest of the way, okay? All right.
This is neat. Really interesting history. Wow. Wow. This is
violin.
I remember.
Yeah, remember that? Some Stradivarius on the inside, but they said it was not the one.
That's like what he had.
Yeah. What he did, he got sick and he ended up, he took all the pain out of it.
Oh boy.
Yeah, and wrecked it.
Jeepers. Right here.
It was
Imagery,
walls
yeah.
like this.
This is where the hanging was.
This is where she died here. Somebody come
I
up
f-
there.
Wow. This was neat. Wow. The Day of the Dead. This was perfect. A lot of history. All right.
So if you look at the far right window of this brick building, that's the window to the master bedroom. And a lot of reports have been of a lady peering out of that window where this small little brick building is at. And that small brick building is actually where the old house is. And a lot of people believe that a pilot looking out of that window where the old house was, where she committed that from that. Some staff and guests that were on the property ended up feeling violence coming out of someone. Now, since we're still on the topics of the spirits and whatnot, there's those of the Whaley family pets that I have not mentioned. I Now, usually they're encountered by children, but it's not uncommon for any of us to really encounter them. So if you get this little brush against your leg, or almost like a feeling as if something kind of licked you, it's more than likely Dolly the Fox Terrier, Dude the Mutt, or Chubby the Pup. And they're just giving you some ghostly puppy love. Now, the spirits of the Whaley house isn't the only legacy of this place. The house has been here for over 160 years, and it's kind of a proud testament to Thomas Whaley's ambition and innovation. And in some ways, it's kind of a reminder of the loving mother that Anna was to her family and those that lived here before.
It worked for you.
Now, speaking of the family, they actually planted these pepper trees that are around the property. They're not native to San Diego, and they are over 100 years old. The one that's closest to the street was planted by Violet herself. Some of us here believe that there was in that tree, and that she reached everybody that was combined with your prayers. So on that note, I think it's about time for us to bid farewell to the Whaleys. Hope you guys enjoyed your time with us. I'll let you guys wander the property if you'd like and whatnot. If you find anything spooky or anything like that, feel free to send that in to us on our main website, or you can tag us on social media. We like all that creepy stuff. We also encourage you guys to give your feedback. You can do that online. You can write it out on a comic card, whichever is preferable to you. And now, on behalf of myself, Old Town Trolley Tours, and most importantly, the Whaley family, I want to thank you all for coming out. I appreciate it. I hope you guys have a great time in Old Town. Before you go, I have a little rhyme that I'm supposed to say. Here it goes. All right. I know we've talked about the ghosts and ghouls and such. I hope we didn't scare you guys too much. But the only ones that really need to hide are those that do not sit there yet. So thank you guys. Hope you all have a great time.
You too.
Without further ado, I will let you guys go. But I'll be here for a couple minutes to answer any questions, okay?
Thank you.
Hey, this was cool. Yeah, good time at the Whaley house for Halloween. And it was a good time. It just
What?
and happy Halloween.
You were saying that too.